When my wife, Hannah, suggested we take a short trip to Canada, I thought it would be a chance to reconnect. Things between us had been distant lately, not hostile, but quiet in a way that made me wonder when we had stopped being teammates. She said a trip would help us relax, to laugh again, to feel normal. I agreed without hesitation, hoping that maybe this time away would remind us why we had chosen each other in the first place. We landed in Vancouver on a Friday morning. The air was crisp, the streets lined with maple trees in bright shades of orange and red. For a while, things actually felt good. We joked about the cold, tried new food, and wandered through small markets. But beneath her laughter, I could still sense a certain detachment, as if she was present physically, but somewhere else emotionally. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she just needed time. On the third day, we planned to visit a small lake outside the city. The drive took about 2 hours, and along the way, Hannah played the music we used to listen to in college. It almost felt like old times again. We stopped at a scenic viewpoint, and while I was taking pictures, she said she wanted to grab coffee from a nearby cabin cafe. "I'll be right back," she said with a grin. I nodded and stayed behind to admire the view. After about 20 minutes, I realized she hadn't returned. I called her phone, no answer. I tried again, still nothing. I walked to the cafe, but she wasn't there. At first, I thought she might be joking around. She loved pulling small pranks. But after an hour of waiting, standing in the cold, my stomach tightened with unease. The car was gone. My luggage, wallet, and jacket were still inside it. All I had was my phone, which was down to 15% battery. I managed to call a cab from the cafe's landline and made my way back to the hotel, shivering both from the cold and confusion. When I reached the front desk, the clerk handed me an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a short note from Hannah: "You take life too seriously. Maybe this will help you loosen up. Don't worry, I'll pick you up tomorrow." My heart sank. It wasn't funny, not even close. I didn't sleep that night. My phone died, and all I could do was sit in silence, wondering what had made her think such a thing could be a lesson. I wasn't angry, just deeply hurt. The next morning, she didn't show up. Nor did she answer any calls from the hotel's phone. I waited until evening, then decided to head to the airport myself. If this was her idea of a joke, it had gone far enough. While waiting in the terminal, I met a woman named Sarah. She was sitting across from me, trying to comfort her crying toddler. I offered to help with her bags when she spilled some juice, and she smiled gratefully. "Rough day?" she asked. I laughed quietly. "You could say that." As we talked, I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. There was something easy about the way she listened, not intrusive, not pitying, just kind. Sarah told me she lived in Toronto and was flying home after visiting her parents. When I mentioned I'd been left stranded, she didn't laugh. She simply said, "Some people don't understand how much their jokes can hurt." That sentence stuck with me. It wasn't advice or judgment, just empathy, the kind I hadn't felt from Hannah in a long time. By the time our flights were called, my phone finally charged enough to show a flood of messages from Hannah. The first few were playful, "Hope you're not too mad." But the later ones turned anxious. "Where are you? Why aren't you at the hotel?" I didn't reply. For once, I wanted space to think. I reached home before she did. When Hannah finally walked through the door 2 days later, her face was pale and worried. "You just disappeared," she said. I was scared. I looked at her calmly and replied, "Now you know how it feels." There was no anger in my tone, only exhaustion. She tried to explain that it was supposed to be a harmless prank, a way to lighten the mood, but I couldn't find any humor in being abandoned in another country. Over the next few weeks, things changed between us. We spoke less, but what we did say was more honest. She apologized more than once, saying she hadn't realized how deeply she'd hurt me. I forgave her, not instantly, but gradually. Trust, once cracked, doesn't heal overnight. But I also began to see that I had let our relationship run on autopilot for too long. Her thoughtless act had shown both of us how disconnected we had become. In the months that followed, I stayed in touch with Sarah occasionally. Not in a romantic way, just as two people who happened to meet at a difficult moment. She often reminded me, without saying much, That kindness from a stranger can sometimes mend a wound better than words from someone familiar. Eventually, Hannah and I decided to take time apart, not out of resentment but to understand who we were beyond our marriage. We didn't end things bitterly. We simply realized that some distances are not meant to be forced closed, but to be respected. Looking back, that trip to Canada changed everything. Not because I met someone else, but because I finally met myself again. It reminded me that love isn't about testing or teaching someone a lesson. It's about standing beside them, even when life gets dull or difficult. Hannah's joke hurt, but it also opened a door I had been too afraid to face. Sometimes, people walk into our lives for just a few hours and still manage to leave a lasting peace. Sarah didn't fix my story. She simply reminded me that I was still allowed to write it differently.